in that sense. The trauma piece. So when you ask like what would or could qualify as a trauma, I think, so I'm going to answer this in two ways. We have some very definitive trauma definitions that are out there. What I would tell you is that if something impacted you in a physiological way, in a mental way, in a spiritual way, in a physical way, right? So your system responds to something, and there is something that sticks around for an extended period of time. That can create the long-term response, PTSD, complex PTSD, traumatic responses that we have. So I personally don't feel that there is one major specific definition of what those traumas could be, that I can't definitively tell you like this could be, this is, and this is, right? Because I think for an individual basis, depending on the situation, depending on who we are, depending on how quickly resources or safety is available, depending on all of these factors, can be something that creates or doesn't create a long-lasting trauma window of sorts, right? It doesn't necessarily mean that all of these things are going to create a symptomology where we're actually diagnosing PTSD. And I guess I come back to that in a little bit, where people who have high anxiety, there may be something connected, that something happened somewhere along the way. And I also want to give a little bit of credit to, there are sometimes generational things that happen. And some of this is kind of passed down biologically. Some of it is passed down in modeling behavior too. So if somebody has high anxiety, that there maybe is a hypervigilance, hyper awareness of things, noticing different things, that could be a trauma response, but you're not necessarily fulfilling all of the PTSD qualifications to get that diagnosis, right? But it doesn't mean that you can't work on that and you can't improve that. When we go into the brain, the neurobiology of things, we know that a lot of our responses are in our midbrain that have a lot to do with our survival mode and our limbic system, and the things that respond very quickly to if we're unsafe or if something is happening. And so sometimes what can happen is, if there's a lot that happens and overwhelms the system, that the system has difficulty in reacclimating and rebalancing itself. So to be able to do that in different ways, a lot of times the best way to do that is through the body. It's not because our brain, so if we think about this being our real cognitive, our cortex is our most cognitive area, is that when we go back into the mid parts of the brain, that's our more felt experience, and our sensory experiences that are coming. And those things all come from what we're taking in, going up to the midbrain first. So when we talk about trauma and our reactions, we can have trauma responses that seemingly come out of nowhere, and we go, what was that? It made no sense. Well, the reason being is that so much of that is sensory oriented, and that goes right into the mid part of the brain that is really our survival mode, our limbic system, our sensory stuff that responds immediately before we even know what's going on. So that happens first, and then we kind of catch up. And so sometimes people don't understand that too, in the sense that, like, well, why can't I prevent these things if I know, right? And it's just not how our brain is set up, because we don't want to have to think about things if we have to jump out of the way of a bus hitting us, right? So we want to like respond immediately as fast as possible in order to survive that. We don't want to sit there and have a debate that, oh, the bus is coming at me. Should I move left? Should I move right? I don't know if I would be able to jump high enough. We don't want to do that, because that is not good for our survival. We will not make it. So
Yeah.
in that sense, our sensory stuff is taken in and very quickly is in our midbrain, but it takes a little bit to get to our cognitive part of the brain where we do a lot of the thinking.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
Yeah. Yeah. No, this is so complicated, honestly. So it's like, it's hard to even like ask one question because it just goes to 10 different directions. I feel like it's hard to even answer anything. But so like it is a good thing that we have that fight or flight
Right.
instinct and all of that, but then it also can obviously hinder our ability to feel these things. So I guess this kind of leads to my next question of like, can you be cured of these things? And then how does EMDR come into play?
Yeah. So I think there is definitely hope, and I want people to have hope, because I think hope is so important, that we are so amazing as humans. Our brains are so amazing. We can do so many things. And that um, the potential to heal is really almost always there. And I'm going to say almost, because in the sense of, if there is actual physical damage, where if we talk about TBIs and things like that, that where there's actual physical damage, sometimes those things cannot be repaired. And depending on where that is in the brain, those are not able to fix themselves or regenerate. And sometimes there really is just too much damage in that sense. Now, if there's no physical damage done, what I think it's really important to have that hope and really be able to have a sense that we can get better, we can heal, we can recover, we can improve our quality of life and have meaningful relationships, meaningful experiences with ourselves, with others, and being able to share in that. So I definitely want to have hope. As I start to talk about EMDR, I think one story I would like to share is actually my very first EMDR client. And so I'll talk a little bit more and I'll get into the explanation of EMDR a little bit. But one of the things that I had done with a client, and my very first client was I think, I want to say she was 78 at the time. And so it was really scary for her. And she had been in therapy, in and out of therapy for probably 30 plus years. And basically felt like there was really not a whole lot that anybody was going to do for her that was going to make any real impact. And so, you know, the first thing I'll say about therapy is so much about the relationship with your therapist. As a therapist, I think that it is the number one thing that we have to be aware of and clued in on, because if we don't build the relationship, then it's very hard for people to share and trust and, you know, really be able to get into some of the hardest stuff that they need to, right? So with that being said, I had developed the relationship with her, and I had told her, I just learned this new technique and I want to try it. And she was like, okay, Erica, I'm going to trust you on this one. And I said, all right, we got this. And so in the EMDR process, part of what is done, but is also, and I don't want people to be scared away from this, but part of the process is thinking about some of the most difficult parts of a trauma. If you have the recall, if you have the recollection, the things that are most impactful or still bothersome to you, the most distressing, right? And so in this process, you ask people to focus on that. And while I was starting this session with her focusing on the worst part of her trauma, which I will share was a sexual trauma at a young age, and she was like, Erica, I'm on a 10. Like 10 meaning distress level all time high. What are you going to do? And I was like, oh gosh, fingers crossed, this works. And in my amazement and in hers, she went from a 10 to a 1 in one session. Now, I am not saying that that is going to happen for everyone. It does not. I have now many years of experience doing EMDR. That does not happen for everyone. But what I will say is that session alone changed so much for this client. And she was just amazed that how she felt at the beginning of the session. And I only did, I would tell you, I don't think I was there for more than 75 minutes. It was basically an hour 15. and and so it was just amazing to see. And I think at that point, I really truly was like, EMDR is amazing. More people need to know about it. More people need to be trained in this. We need to do more than we are. So EMDR stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. And I have been using this in my practice now for about 5 years. And so I had almost 10 years of being a therapist without being EMDR trained. And in that way, I'm actually thankful in the sense that as a therapist, I did a lot of other things throughout my practice in the first 10 years before learning EMDR. I now love EMDR and I use it quite a bit. But I also can see the difference. And I can see the difference in my own practice with having worked with many people for many years without EMDR, and now being able to work with people with EMDR and having the training, having the knowledge, and really being able to work with them in honestly, I think most of the time speed up the recovery by 3 times, 5 times. I don't even know. Couldn't even tell you. But when people really invest and decide that they are going to do EMDR,